For many of us, work is a place where we have to go. But what if it was a place where we wanted to go? What would have to be true for work to be a better place for all of us? My guest and employee experience design expert, Lisa Morris, is passionate about designing ways to make the world of work a much better place for people. In this conversation, Lisa and I discuss her perspective on shifts in the workplace in the last 30 years, discovering human-centered design and shifting her professional focus to employee experience design, mentorship, distinguishing between technical expertise and true leadership, deep listening and making a connection with each other at work, the importance mindset plays in enabling people to design effective solutions, how studying typography helped her be a more effective consultant, the workplace as community, how to make work a better place for people, and more. Let's dive in. Lisa, thank you so much for being on Making Business Art today. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It should be a very delightful conversation.
I think so. How are you doing today?
I'm well. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing well.
It's Tuesday. It's not Monday. It's better.
There you go. Lisa, so you have a lot of work experience in things that touch the world of HR in a number of ways, plus many other things that you have done in your career. But before we get into all of that, I am just curious to ask you something. So we're both people who pay attention to how experiences work in the workplace and with products and services. I'm curious if you have a memorable or favorite experience with a brand.
I think I'll forever be enamored with a few of my first purchases of Apple products, if I'm honest with you. I think a lot of it has to do with the experience of going to buy it and how delightful that was. Now, that was many years ago. And just, I think the packaging is just, it's very aesthetically pleasing to me, and that it's very simple but sophisticated. And it's the user experience of even the packaging was quite intentional. So that's a brand that I think I've had some very good memories from. And as a result, really recommend, quite honestly, that product more often than not.
Yeah, same here. Actually, a story that bubbled up for me as I was thinking of this question also happens to be at the Apple Store. So this is circa 2005 or 6 at the Pentagon City Mall in Northern Virginia. And I remember that the Apple Store was always packed. Oh, any day at any hour, it was just packed. And I remember going in there. I think I was buying an iPod because I think I had an iPod fatality and I was replacing it. And I was looking at the line to check out, and I was like, oh my God, I really hate waiting in line, just in general, Lisa, by the way. And there was somebody helping me. And then I was looking at the line, and like, oh God. And then they just brought over a terminal, and just in random location in the store, and just checked me out. And I was like, oh, this is the best thing ever. Like, I had not experienced that. This is again 2005 or 6. I thought that was just so genius.
Yeah. No point intended, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, true. And I'll tell you something as an extension of that story. Sony had the audacity to open a store like right kind of catty corner, like right across basically from the Apple Store. And the store was like, it was dark. It was this kind of dark, mysterious store. And the contrast was that the Apple Store was always packed and the Sony store maybe had like 5 people in it at a given time. It was pretty stark. And eventually they closed. I think they just gave up. They were like, okay, we're just going to close this store after, I don't know, 3 years. And I just regret never taking a photo of that, because that would have been great for like stories for presentations with clients. Yeah, but thank you for sharing. Yeah, it's just really cool how a really good experience can live on with you for like over a decade or like forever.
And I'm pretty much a loyalist now to Apple. I have probably 3 or 4 different laptops. I have an iMac. I have iPads. I have the phone. I mean, the ecosystem is pretty amazing. And here and there, you get a little frustrated with maybe the change in the user experience on the phone or something. But if you actually kind of reflect on them being, at least in my eyes, the leading kind of design, if you will, and everything that they even some of the new functionality that you find on your phone, whether it's about how many hours you slept last night or that kind of stuff, it's pretty remarkable. Now, of course, there's all the other not so great things like who's listening to you and all that stuff, but I don't think that's
True.
necessarily a
Yeah.
product of what Apple's done, but rather other aspects. But
Hmm.
yeah, I am enamored. I was enamored by Steve Jobs when he was alive, and I
Hmm.
still am enamored by like watching the show and seeing all of the kind of iteration that they went through to get to where they are. So
Absolutely. I upgraded. This is a MacBook, like an M1 MacBook Pro. I upgraded in December of 2021. And even somehow the lid, they did something to the lid that even the lid somehow it's just very precise and very smooth. And it's like who pays attention to that? Like who else pays that much attention to
the
detail and
detail.
design? I think Apple, they're not perfect, obviously, but they do
No.
a really good job overall, I think.
Yeah,
Anyway, so
absolutely.
let's move on before we lose any PC audience. We're like, oh, it's just Apple people. Well, Lisa, so now we're formally starting our conversation with a question I always ask, and that is, where do you work and what do you get paid to do?
Yeah. So I actually worked for myself. I started I'll call it a boutique studio slash firm, if you will. And my focus is on employee experience design, full stop. So I help organizations apply human-centered design to improve or innovate experiences for people in the workplace. And I try not to say employees, but sometimes I slip. And the reason
Mhm.
why I'm sort of fetish about that is because I think that we need a new name for people that work in the workplace beyond employees. Because if you look in the
Mm,
dictionary and you define the word employee, it's all about a financial commitment to one another. And at least that's how it's defined in the book in the dictionary I look. And I don't believe that's the contract in and of itself any longer. And I don't
mhm.
know. I think we're ready for a shift. And I think the shift is upon us. So to answer
Yeah.
your question, it is employee experience design, full stop. Not only do I help applied design, but I also sort of, I guess you would say, help people learn how to apply it themselves. So.
And the name of your company?
Oh, sorry. Yes, explore.
Explore.
XPLOR.
Nice. So let me just pick up on something that you were just sharing, because coincidentally, I was reflecting on this not too long ago. So I've been, and I'm surely I read this somewhere. It's not some
Mhm.
original thought, surely not. But I've been thinking about work more as communities of people who
Mhm.
come together than employees. And even like if you really think about it, companies or organizations don't really exist. I mean, it's a legal fiction on paper. I mean, you can even point at a building, but the building is not the company or the organization. It's really a group of people working together somewhat in somewhat organized manner towards some shared
Something.
goal.
Yeah.
And it really strikes me more like, well, it's really more about community and how could, in thinking about transforming work, how can work feel more like a community or just have more warmth and humanity in it than being like just overly transactional and like competitive and some of the other many stereotypes that most listeners can think of when we think of like corporate life, right? I don't know. Do you have any reactions to that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm completely with you.
Mm,
Although I would, I guess, argue one side of it, which is yes, but community itself is very loose, if you
mm,
will, at least in my opinion.
mm,
And unfortunately or fortunately, I guess depending on whether you're a lawyer or not, there are things that we have to put in place to safeguard our people or people, I should say, because nobody's anybody else's people. And I'm like, when I see your employees or your people, I strike it out like immediately. Nobody owns these people. They are not your people. They are people who choose to make a decision to work at your company. So it's not yours. I'm not your asset. I'm not your
mm,
liability. I am a person who's made a decision. So I'm very, again, a little bit fetish about some of that stuff. There's feels like
mhm.
this ownership mentality that I don't align with any longer in how I think of work. But to answer your question, yeah, I mean, I think we have a ways to make it as such. I think there are needs to safeguard only because there are kind of things that happen that require us to safeguard, if you will. But yeah, I'd like to think that it could be 90% community and maybe 10% safeguard. I think today it's the opposite, perhaps, where we've
Yeah.
become overly protected, and it's almost become the excuse as to why we can't be open any longer. So it feels to me like there could be a better, I wouldn't say balance, or maybe balance, but I don't mean 50-50. I mean 80-20 or some kind of rule like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, Lisa, I'm just gonna jump in the time machine here and go way, way back to the early 90s where you started your career at Accenture and you were there for, gosh, almost 20 years focused on business and organizational transformation. And I know over that span of time, you kind of had your hands in projects that touched different areas of business, but I think that was kind of like the nugget of your core focus. So looking back, so now we're 30 years ago, what changes or trends in the workplace in the past 30 years do you find most striking?
It's interesting. That's a great question. I think if I do look back at the time I spent at Accenture, and as a result of that kind of time, spending time in lots of different organizations, I feel like we've moved so far forward while I feel like we stayed in the same place. And let me explain what I mean by that. So I feel like individuals are looking for a greater sense of purpose, and many have found it. Equally, I feel like when I interact with some organizations, it's like they got comfortable a very long time ago and they don't want to change because for some reason they believe they're successful because they're not changing, which I think is kind of interesting because actually only grow when you change, as we all know with humans, right? So it feels to me like that's an interesting dichotomy where we have, I mean, let's be honest, now we have different kinds of marriages that we accept in the workplace. We probably have more different kinds of partnerships that we accept in the workplace. We have many more issues, unfortunately, to deal with health in the workplace and well-being in the workplace. So obviously, given the world that we live in, we are learning, I think, how to deal, if you will, with crises, as an example, like COVID. I don't think we were ready for COVID at the time, but I think we're ready now for what happens after COVID, frankly. We're a little bit more flexible and adaptable. I know this is going to be very unpopular, but I wish that happened 10, 15 years ago. And the reason why I say that is because I actually think we might be in a better position to be able to manage a life that involves work that allows people to have a stronger balance. And if I look back at health issues that have come awry, mental illness issues that have come awry from stressful work environments, I wonder if we were pushed a little bit out of our comfort zone 15 years ago, if we might be a better place, what I call a better world to work in today, a little bit, because we wouldn't have been so comfortable in that state of kind of locked, if you will, in what we thought was a safe garden, if you will, and that we were almost living, I think, in a very fictitious world. We can do that as we live in. I worked at Accenture for that long. I almost believe that was the only world that I could live in, frankly. Even when I chose to make a decision to leave, that was an extremely difficult decision, one that took me many years to grieve and recover from, if I'm brutally honest with you, because for 20 years, not only were they my place of work, but they became my family and my friends. And when I made a decision to leave, frankly, because of health, if I'm honest, I had to not only get over the things that I was struggling with personally, but I had to then layer on, I don't know any other companies. I don't know what they do. I don't know how other cultures work beyond. Of course, I did client work, but for so long, I was so ingrained in this life called Accenture, which for a long time was it's an amazing learning experience. But, when you don't have somebody tapping on your shoulders, whether it's even yourself asking you, is this good for you? Are you going in the right ways? And you hope to grow, or not even reflecting on those questions, time goes by really fast.
Yeah.
And you can get very locked in, if you will, to a mode that when you step out of it, you can then see and reflect of all the goodness and the lessons But if you don't have that trigger for you to do that, yeah, you get lost in it for a very long time. So if I kind of go back to your original question, the things that I would not even think of as requests these days, but rather demands, you would have never thought of years ago.
True.
Even the relationship I think you have with your boss and the balance of women and females, etc., in the organization and who's in the leadership role. And I think a lot of times it felt to me as very much like I was living under somebody else's authority still, and I hadn't been able to have a voice. So now we know that's radically different, I think, in a lot of situations, and that's a very good thing, I think, for people. Yet I still think there's some organizations where people are still living in those environments, I would say.
Yeah. Well, I grew up 80s and 90s, and I wonder moving forward, younger people who grew up early 2000s, very late 90s, but mostly the aughts and in the past decade, I wonder if part of that flexibility is the psychology of that is shaped partially by our tech ecosystem where everything's free, right? Gmails, like so many things are free, so many things are very flexible, you can switch around. It's like almost people don't necessarily have loyalty outside of whatever's serving them best at any one moment, and it's just very easy to switch. I even remember I have a screenshot of a tweet saved somewhere again for to make a point in workshops and presentations of this young woman who says, I've been on hold with my bank for an hour. I just opened up a bank account in a different bank and transferred my money, and I'm still on hold. And imagine like switching banks, that is like a really huge hurdle, like mental hurdle for most people. And even within the last 10, 15 years, it's just become like that easy for, well, at least for some people to
Yeah.
just switch financial institutions. I mean, what's your take on that? Because you've also seen in the span of these past 30 years, you've also seen like a lot of shifts in technology. Like I'm just realizing like, wow, you started work and like that was like pre-Windows 95, for instance, that then was ubiquitous in my world later on when I was entering college and
Yeah.
so forth.
Yeah.
Yeah, what's your take on how technology has changed and maybe has that shaped the psyche of younger people in some way and their expectations? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question. And I think that was always sort of the hypothesis that technology would change our world. And I think, quite frankly, it has. I can remember, and this is not to date myself, but rather to make an interesting point. When I was in high school, the typewriter was the ways in which we wrote letters beyond handwriting, which, by the way, I wish we would go back to. But in some ways, typewriter. And so if I would go back to that point in time and have learned, if you will, on a computer, I might be in a completely different career. I think I would probably be in a different career. I mean, I love design, but I probably would have gone into graphic design from the very, very get-go, quite frankly. But because the technology
Right.
wasn't
Yeah.
there or present, if you will, more ubiquitous, if you will, it never kind of came into my view that was a profession, right? Yet people were still using pens, and so I could have done it, but it wasn't as visible. And I think what I'm trying to say is that I do think technology shapes our world. I think it shapes our world in different ways. So the visibility, if you will, like I remember when we went, how sad, when the World Wide Web was going to come in and it was going to change our world. It did change our world. There was no if it was going to. It has radically changed our world. And I think in many ways it has made us more curious, but extremely impatient.
Yes. Yeah.
Yet it's given us choice. So I think in the example you gave about finding another bank that's just choice. We have more choice now. And because we have more visibility, we're more informed on our choice. And so we have higher expectations of what we want, what we feel we need. And some of it, I feel, it's almost like we were born with that right to want and need. And I feel like we've been somewhat oppressed around what that should look like because people were shaping our world by their own agenda, so to speak. And I don't think our world allows for that much now. So there's beauty in the idea that, and again, anything good can be bad if not used in the right way. So I'll just say that straight up,
True.
period.
Yeah.
Yet I think as society, if you will, progresses and technology is introduced, I, even as somebody who doesn't believe she's a technologist in any way, shape, or form, I'm addicted to my technology. It's not that I need to be on my phone every 2 minutes. It's just that if I want to find something out, I don't go to the encyclopedias I have in my library anymore. I go to
Mhm.
Google. I mean, so I do think technology has transformed our lives. And as a result, I think it's massively transformed what we expect in the workplace. And I think it'll continue to be that case because technology is just, it's moving at such a lightning speed. I mean, I even think about like the first TV that I watched TV from, and now what TVs can do.
Yeah.
And even the fact that some of our elderly, like even my parents are who are in, my mom's in her last year of 70s, my dad's in his 80s, they've adapted. Like when people tell me that people don't like change or they're not easily adaptable, I think that's like, I call BS to that. Because I was like, look, there's 80-year-old people who've got iPhones, who are
Mhm.
texting, who are using their iPads to do FaceTime to see their loved ones. People adapt. I think it's that ability that we don't want them to for some reason because there's some comparison or we think that it's not good for us. But I don't know. I
Yeah.
see a lot of evidence of the beauty of it. And of course, again, as I said, anything overused or misused can be bad. I don't care if it's a piece of paper or a pen, it can still be done, used for the wrong reasons. So, yeah.
Yeah. Random question. Have you ever typed on a mechanical typewriter back in the day?
Yes.
I used to do homework on one of those. Man, that was different, right?
Yeah. Yes. It was a lot of work.
Exercise your hand strength.
I know, right? And then I remember then when the electric came and you could like go whoop and the thing would like
Mhm.
move and then restart. Like that was like OMG, that was amazing.
Yeah.
And then I remember for being introduced to my first Macintosh. I bought it when I was in grad school because I was going to do my thesis, and I was like, I can't even imagine doing my thesis on a typewriter, right? So at that time, I had the big Mac box, like literally
Mhm.
that big stack thing. And I think the screen was probably about this big, Ezekiel.
Yeah.
If you can recall that, right? And at the time, my fiance at the
Mhm.
time was more enamored with that thing playing it like Atari games on it. And I was like, move over, I gotta do my thesis. And I could never get him. I mean, he was like such an early adopter. So it's interesting because he was the
Yeah.
early adopter. I was the late one coming to the party, learning from him, frankly. But it wasn't, like I said, it's never been my like, I have to have it all. And now though, I'm very picky about my tech. So
Me
it's
too.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even something that was just imagery that was bubbling up from you as you were describing these things is like getting around, like going to a place in the 90s where you had to like call and get the directions and like write them down and follow it, and then like look at a map. Like I went on a road trip, say like, and we
Yeah.
had to look at a map, and then eventually there was like MapQuest, remember that, and Yahoo
Yeah.
Maps. You would enter the
Yahoo.
thing and like
Yeah.
print it out and like
You're
try
still
to like.
printing it out, taking it with you. Yeah.
And now you just go with your phone. You can go to like any random whatever town. You just land and you're looking up like restaurants and PS on the phone and just getting around. That part's kind of cool in
Yeah.
some ways. Just like I think if you use it right, it can facilitate more discovery for you.
Yeah. I think yeah. I mean, I think it's a great,
Right.
I had my mother here this weekend and we went out and of course did a little bit of shopping. And of course I purchased something for her. And the lady said, so tell me, what's her phone number? I was like, I looked at my mom and I'm like, I don't know your phone number. I have to look on my phone. Like, I don't like
Mhm.
remember her phone number, her address. So part of me says, does remembering a phone number or address make you any better? Does it contribute to society? And my answer was no, it's just garbage you keep in your head. So it's like kind of like the decision between what are we missing that makes us better humans, and what are
Mhm.
the stuff that technology is allowing us to let go of so that we can use more of our brain for more discovery, maybe more experimentation, maybe more exploration. So I think that's an interesting conversation to have
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. I do get concerned with technology and I think about how technology might be deconditioning our bodies and nervous systems in some ways that are not good. And for example, since we're sharing here about work through the ages, I just got transition glasses because I need reading glasses now. It's
Yeah.
that stage of life. And as I do, because I'm very curious, I'm just like bombarding the poor eye doctor with random nerdy
All the black
questions.
lighters.
And then we got on the topic of how there's like this epidemic of myopia now, because since everybody is just looking at screens up close, the musculature of the eye, et cetera, is just becoming
Yeah.
kind of deconditioned to like seeing far away. So now there's like an explosion of young people who need glasses, which is good for the doctor, obviously, but it's a reflection of how the technology is maybe. I'm just concerned if technology might numb us in some things. And anyway, so it's just
Yeah, and I
ongoing.
think that goes
And I
back to
think,
the invention of the TV. I remember like as
mm,
a child, because the TVs were smaller as children, right? So
mhm,
I'll never forget we used to sit like right in front of the TV because there were five of us. So we're all like, move over, right? And my mom used to always say, you guys are all gonna need glasses because you're just getting too close to the TV. Well, the reality of it is we all have glasses. Now, I'm not quite sure it was because of that, but the point here is that it does have some negative effects to us. I recently, like you, had a transition in my life. I went to cataract. I had cataract, so I actually had new lenses put in my eyes. But I haven't been able to see very well since I was 12 years old. So I think it's something else. But the reality of it is, even in my transition, now I can see 20/20 from far, but I
mm,
need glasses close. So that makes it even more challenging for tech. So now I have to wear, like you, I have to wear glasses like when I'm even looking at you this close because it's not clear. But it's interesting because now I can't like look at my phone and it's a little bit like this and this. And after a while, the frustration level just climbs. Like you can't read directions on the medicine bottle or whatever. But to your point, like I think some of that is due to technology and the ability that even the things that you can't see, like you expect everything to be able to like spread it so you can see it like you do on your iPhone or any other tech. And it's such
mhm.
like, well, that technology doesn't exist in everything, but you want it to. You know what I mean? You become accustomed to it being an easier thing for you to manage. So it's
Yeah.
interesting.
So I just want to go back to something you were saying a while back about leader or leadership. And I'm curious if you think approaches to leadership in organizations have changed in some ways in the early 90s, or are they essentially the same, which
Hmm.
might be what your feeling is? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think you can easily say it has or it hasn't, but I think that's so unfair because I think I guess the way I would say it is individuals in leadership roles may have progressed. Leadership as a collective has moved little. That's how I would
Mm,
describe it. So I think I think good leaders are good people. I don't think that's the other way around. So I think to me, I have had leaders in my past, and my experience is if they weren't great leaders, they weren't exactly the best of humans either.
mm,
And I should phrase that by saying they were the best humans they could be at the
mm,
time, but it doesn't necessarily mean they were great role models or great mentors or things of that nature. And I think that's just it. A leader is a human, but I guess I would say that if you are a leader, well, you are a human for sure if you're a leader. If you're going to take on the responsibility of being a leader, you've just taken on the responsibility of doing something that not everybody else does. So step up to it then and show us that you can be a leader as opposed to I'm a human with the title of leader, but I don't act it, I don't demonstrate it, and those kinds of things. I don't know. I think it still exists. I think those kinds of leaders still exist. I think the reality of it is that they're not in a position of huge authority, they get filtered out. They're getting filtered out, I guess is how I would
mm,
say, because not
mm,
many of us are willing to stick with it for as long as we have. Now, that's a very US centric point of view, I will admit. I think in other countries, it's not as acceptable, I guess, to speak out or stand out, frankly. So, but for me, I rate myself very critically as being a good leader. I think I didn't learn a lot of the coping mechanisms as a child, perhaps, that make a good leader. I don't think I am one in a million. I think I'm the same as millions, frankly. So I think if you don't learn coping mechanisms, strong coping mechanisms as a child, or you're not nurtured in those areas, I think leaders need the best coping mechanisms possible. And so I feel like I didn't learn great coping. I've learned much better coping mechanisms now as a more senior adult, if you will. But I think that fundamentally, if you haven't learned good coping mechanisms as a child or in your early adult life, you will not be a good leader. That you'll struggle to be a good leader. It'll be a very mechanical leadership style, which not many people will connect with. So I guess that's what I would say, Ezekiel. Leaders are individuals, so we're deciding
Right.
whether an individual is a good leader versus saying leadership as a whole. And then again, if you're saying somebody's human, that means they have strengths and weaknesses. And some of those strengths lend themselves for good leadership, and some of those weaknesses take away from that. So it's a bit of a balance act. So I'm sorry, I don't know. That wasn't a non-answer, but I also don't want to stereotype
Mm.
people in those roles. Yet I would just say that we have a ways to go, I think, if we want to, I would just call it lay a level of equality of good leadership across our world. I think we got a ways to go.
Yeah. Many years back, I was of the mindset like, well, to be a good leader, you just need to be smart and the education and have some skills in your area of expertise. And then just being in the world, working, maturing over time, I really recognize, I mean, the obvious really, how somebody gets promoted due to like a specific skill area, but now they're promoted to do something very different. And a lot of time leadership is like, I mean, I've heard people say like 98% of my time I spent being a psychologist, right? You're just dealing with
Yeah.
human issues. And more often than not, people are not ready for that transition. And not to blame the individual, but there's also not a support system to help people into that transition in terms of what you're saying, like coping
Mhm.
mechanisms, how do you deal with others, like really helping that person kind of evolve as a human to grow into this leadership role. And this is also just making me think of recently somebody recommended a book. I think it's called Mastering Leadership. And I don't remember the authors' names right now. They're two older gentlemen, so they've been around for a while. And they spend a good portion of the book talking about inner game. And they even get into some kind of spiritual stuff that kind of feels like Taoism. It has this Taoist flavor to it. And I don't know if I would have received the information in that book 15 years ago, the same that I'm now,
Mhm.
because now I recognize how important that is. And I think something that we have spoken offline, just acknowledging that we both have an immigrant background coming into the
Yeah.
US in some particular circumstances, right, where there's just beliefs and ways of being and mental models from the old country that our parents bring with them. And some of the gaps in those coping mechanisms come up for that. But it's not only for immigrants. I think anybody growing up in resource starved circumstances, emotionally starved circumstance,
Yeah.
any other kind of difficult circumstance might just learn to cope with life in ways that are not really healthy for other people to experience once they're in a position of authority.
Yeah. I mean, I think
Yeah.
you can say the same for the reverse. Those that have lived in extravagant backgrounds with riches, if you will, and resources, and I don't
Right.
necessarily mean financial, they then come with their own mental model and their expectations are rather different as well. So I think the topic of leadership is really interesting because I mean, one could argue, why do we even need that? Why do we need people to be leaders are meant, or maybe we change the definition of what leadership is, because in most companies, it's people who have somehow risen. Let's just be honest. They're risen. They're up here. That's why they're called leader. You're down here because you're not leader. And that already creates some layers, if you will, or some sense of somebody's looking up to you and you are looking down on them, frankly. Why isn't maybe it more like peer? Why aren't we working together? We say we're working together, yet you're up here and I'm down here. I don't know. Is there room to redefine what leadership really means? And there's leadership and then there's leader. So we used to always talk about what's the difference between the big L and the little L. of leadership, like big D design and small d design, right? So everyone can
Yeah.
be, if you will, demonstrate leadership capability. Maybe that's what we should focus on versus the big L with seniority and tenure and understanding really that somebody has to steer the ship, because otherwise the ship will go wherever the more of the weight, if you will. Sometimes that means over. But the point is there needs to be the master facilitator, if you will. But wouldn't it be different if that person was the master facilitator instead of being this idolized, if you will, person that people are even afraid to approach in the office or something like that?
Right. Yeah. I've also, I think I said this in another episode. Over time, I really distinguished the difference between, say, somebody who came up through the ranks in a corporate environment or government environment, kind of like a career person, versus like a founder or a startup, or especially a founder of a nonprofit. Nonprofit
Mm,
founders are like special breed of
yeah.
people, in my view, because they're really like keepers of the flame and of the
Mm,
vision. And I've known nonprofit leaders in a past life when I worked in nonprofits, grant making, who they're just pit bulls
yeah.
for this vision, and they will just make shit happen
Yeah.
in service of helping others, which
Mm,
is a beautiful thing, at
yeah.
least for me. So, so there's always, not always, I mean, there's just like different flavors of leadership and where people come from and why. Like, there's some people who maybe their primary motives are like status seeking and
Yeah.
revenue,
Ego. Yeah. Ego revenue
and
generation. Yeah.
and then there's the nonprofit founder who is just like really
Yeah.
committed to a
Yeah.
vision to serve others, and that's amazing. They're
Yeah.
also a little nutty, but in good ways
Well,
most of the time.
yeah, good or you can't take the good with the bad. I think it's interesting though, as we start talking about leadership and what are the qualities of a good of quote unquote good leadership, and the fact that there isn't a course that you go to a graduate school or whatever and take this leadership course, right? I mean, wouldn't that be interesting? I mean, I think there's now that you could take entrepreneurial studies and things like that, but that's different than leadership. So is it that really good leaders come out of life experience
Mm-hmm.
because there's no course or program, right? It's the program, as we say, is life. Well, life is what's meant to teach you about life, right? There's no let me go to life school so I can learn about life before I have to live it. Wouldn't that be nice? I can write a book on that. But or a few. But it's sort of like that with leadership. Like you can read as many books and blah blah blah. I'm not quite sure it's done it for me, frankly. I think it's through my life experiences, making mistakes, frankly, that I don't really feel proud of yet. Now, still, I don't know what the right word is, but it's then that I learned, ooh, that wasn't good, and I could actually be a stronger leader if I had done this route instead.
Yeah.
But yeah, in so many companies, technical expertise gets you to a manager role,
Mm-hmm.
but what makes a good manager is very little technical expertise. I would argue, though, that I have had leaders in my past who are very, their level of expertise in I'll just call it the practice they were leading was very low. Therefore, they could not build credibility. And you have to be able to build credibility to be a good leader. So I think technical expertise is a must, but I think the balance between your technical expertise and I'll just call it your leadership expertise has to be in balance. You could find a good leader. I think the mix would be technical expertise that's still the person's still trying to, I would say, hone their craft. And the other craft is leadership. So it has to be, in my opinion, a balance because that's how I think you connect a little bit more in a very practical way with people who are meant to follow you. You have to be able to, I think, give them some kind of learning, which is beyond like what I'm learning as a leader isn't something I can teach you tomorrow. It's something you have to come about and learn yourself. But in technical expertise, I can save you some, if you will, some painful experiences, if you will, or I can teach you how to better apply expertise. I don't know, maybe I'm being a little biased in my point of view there, but I do think technical expertise is more easily taught, where leadership is something you have to experience because we all have our own styles
Yeah.
of
Well,
and our pasts.
well, I think this conversation actually is a good segue to something else I wanted to bring up. And I'll just frame this by acknowledging, like in my own professional journey, I have myself, as well as many colleagues, in many conversations over the years, I've encountered people who just will have this shared complaint about not really having access to mentorship. And sometimes the leaders around us, they're just really busy with their own agenda and they're not really mentoring the people around them. Maybe the people around them, maybe they learn what not to do from
From them.
observing what the leader is doing, but not somebody who kind of like the Obi-Wan, right? The Yoda
Totally.
character that hangs out with you and shows you the ropes. That's largely absent, I think, for a lot of people. So I'm curious about what has been your own, again, direct or indirect experience through colleagues, through others with mentorship, because I think mentorship can be a huge leg up in learning about leadership if you have the blessing of connecting with the right person.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to tell you and be frankly honest with you, I just have not had a good experience with mentorship, if I'm honest with you. And I have seen folks who have had the beauty of an amazing mentor, whether they were a mentor in the same company or externally. And that's something I feel disadvantaged by big time. And now if I look at it, I say, well, I could have taken a different initiative, you know what I mean? But I didn't know what I didn't know, frankly. How can we hold something that? But yeah, I think you're right. I think a mentorship can be a massive accelerator to people, whether in leadership or even in technical expertise. But I also think it takes a special kind of person to be a mentor extraordinaire, if you know what I'm trying to say, because you really need to be selfless, I think, in mentorship. And that's why I always found it really like, even at Accenture, there's a mentorship program. And I just didn't believe in it because I'm like, at some point in time, it feels
Mm,
very strategic, if that makes any sense, very
yeah,
planned. And
right.
even they would say, well, we didn't, you can pick whoever you want. I know, but you don't get it. Like, usually the mentors are more senior and they have a game that they know is being played. And then you feel like you're a peg in the game. And
Mm,
so I always
mm,
chose to find mentors that were in fields, for example, that I really aspire to be in, but I never was able to really establish, I would say, a long-term mentorship, if that makes any sense. I am a mentor to somebody nowadays who was on my team in the past. And if I'm honest, I feel like I'm a really good mentor to him. And that's because I've almost envisioned him as part of my family. It changes the way that you view it. And it's because I don't have anything to gain strategically. I have no agenda for him because he's not a peg, if you will, on my board. He
mm,
is somebody I have a connection with, and all I want to do is see him succeed. And so, without that kind of like connection to the same kind of company with the same kind of politics, I feel like that frees me to be the person that would tell you, don't take that crap from anybody. You don't deserve that. Stand up for your right. You're strong. Like, I can be very compassionate in a way that's very authentic. Whereas I think sometimes it's really challenging for people who are senior, who are meant to be mentors to junior people in the same company. Because that's like a really hard position. That's like unconscious bias that kind of comes in there. And we all know it's called unconscious bias for a reason. It's not that easily found or easily understood or easily witnessed, so to speak. So for me, again, that's been my experience with mentorship. I wish it was completely different. I feel like I might be in a different place. Interesting. And now I feel like I have some people in my network who are, I guess I would say they're younger than me. Yet I feel like I don't think age is a factor any longer in how I evaluate mentorship. So that's a good thing. Age is
yeah.
not like a age is no longer a filter, I think, in some of that for me at least. I'm much more open to I'm going to take what I can from the thing. I'm confident enough to know where I'm not accepting something because I have a block towards it, meaning I should
Mhm.
accept it because it'll help me grow, versus taking something that doesn't serve me. And it's not that I have a block for it, it's just I'm in a different place at a different time. And so the advice or the input is easily discarded, filtered and
Yeah.
discarded versus filtered and sort of digested, if you will.
Yeah. I mean, the idea of age is interesting because I think just by virtue of being around longer, there's something about that just across the board, I think deserves some
Yeah.
credit. But also, I remember when I worked for the government of District of Columbia. That's where I started to observe, say, the person who has, say, 20 years of experience, and there's a person that evolved over 20
Mhm.
years and really gained experience, and then there's been the person who has been doing the same thing 20 times over, and it's
Yeah.
kind of like in and out, in at 9, out at 5, collects a paycheck, just there's just no growth. It's just like
Yeah.
no evolution. It's just the same. And maybe and that's just a commentary about work. I'm not making a commentary of the person. Maybe the person has super rich life outside of work.
Yeah.
Good for them. But in terms of work, I've seen both sides. And to me that was just really shocking to be like, wow, you can spend 20 years and just kind of like Groundhog's Day doing the same thing. That obviously that's not my temperament. Like I can't do that. But yeah, so it's interesting with age is like where versus I've also met people who are like not even 30, but they just have had so many life experiences packed into very, very few years and they have just a lot to share.
Yeah. I mean, I
Yeah.
think one of the richest things about that, though, is just whether they've been through a lot of life experiences or not, the way that I have kind of embraced it a bit is to realize that their mental model will be different than my mental model. So even
Mhm.
by virtue of learning about somebody else's mental model, I
Mhm.
can be introspective and say, that's interesting. I've never really thought about that way. And if I were to at least consider it, how might it change how I view something that might be something that I'm trying to work through, either creatively or something that's a personal block or something. So I can 100% tell you that wasn't how I always was. I was very much
Mhm.
like, I wouldn't say I was narrow-minded, but I was very set, if you will, on
Yeah.
what good looks like, what bad looks like, and no
Mhm.
black and white, if you will. And that's one lesson I wish I had learned a lot younger in life, frankly. But you learn when you're supposed to learn, I guess. But the point is, you can learn something from almost anyone and that's what we learn in design, of course. If you could just walk in somebody else's shoes, you can understand
Mhm.
not only why they think about something the way they do, but how that might help your perspective, if you will, in an area of your life that you are challenged with or feel like you could accelerate even more. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one last thought on this is just taking some personal responsibility for all of
mhm,
us, myself included, is to also reflect about looking back. Okay, well, I didn't have access. I mean, very much like you, I just didn't have access to mentors. And I also wonder how much I was closed off, like I wasn't listening, and how
mhm,
much I was closed off to things. There are younger family members that I've tried to be like, here, let me save you a few hours of life by sharing
yeah,
something, and they're just not receptive to it,
mhm,
right? And years later, kind of what I was saying kind of came to pass, and I'm like, well, there you go.
yeah,
And but it's also a reflection, not so much judgment on them, but it's like an interesting observation to reflect on myself. Like, well, when may I have missed an opportunity to receive something that would have really added value to my life? And this journey into design thinking and the type of work that we do has really been a journey into learning the craft of listening, because that's the nugget. It's not the
yeah,
innovation or the ideas or the creativity. It's really deep listening,
yeah.
and training the ear and the body to sense and perceive things. So we can complain, but there's also, I guess, some self-awareness that we can, or
Oh yeah,
self-reflection we can do around
yeah,
this.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I like you could easily say that I was closed off. And I think it's really
Yeah.
interesting if I really reflect, because when I started doing human-centered design, which is probably about 12 or so years ago, I was probably at a point in time in my career where I was literally like, what is this? I mean, I had worked for so many years and thought to myself, I just feel like I'm in a rat race. You know what I mean? And
Right.
walk into my life as human-centered design, which at the same point in time taught me to listen, to be a little bit more introspective, to like to understand why humans behave the way they behave. I mean, I studied organizational behavior
Right.
in graduate school, but it never really penetrated, so to speak, to a like a me immersed in it to a point where I can be like, oh yeah, that's right. Oh yeah. So I feel blessed by the fact that I do human-centered design, not only because it's gratifying work, but it actually has helped me, I think, become a better person, as dorky and nerdy as that might sound.
I
So,
think it also acknowledges tying back to stuff we were talking about, learning to be a leader, and what you're just mentioning is that all of this it's really an embodied experience. It's like we can't learn to ride a bike from a book or swim
mm,
from a book. And I think there's some useful information we can draw from a book to lead or for the world of work. But at the end of the day, it's just embodied. You just have to jump into it with your entire nervous system and all your senses
yeah,
and learn by doing a lot of the time, as you have
yeah,
been pointing out in this conversation so far.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely.
So, Lisa, as design thinking has gained popularity in the world of work in the last 15 years or so, so paying attention to employee experience, which is your bag, also known as EX, it has become an area of focus for some leaders and HR units. So, can we just stop here for a moment and define terms like what is explore employee experience, or how do you define it?
Yeah. So the way that I think of defining employee experience, I think there's two perspectives in it. One of them is the human individual perspective, the employee's perspective, and one of them is the organization's perspective. So from the employee's perspective, for me, it's, without sounding so mechanical, it's the sum of the interactions they have with the organization and all the things that happen in organizations, the people, the place, the things, if you will. And more importantly, I think it's how people perceive those interactions, if you will, how they understand and make them make sense for them. And then how they remember them, because what they are and what we remember are very different things. And so when you're working in that space, it's very much a perception world, if you will. And I think from the organization side, it's really about an ability for an organization to kind of connect with a human's reason and emotion over time. So when I describe employee experience, I think about these two perspectives, because it's the one having the experience and the one who's really kind of responsible for creating the experience. Although the person having the experience has a role in the way the experience actually evolves or transforms or comes to play, if you will. So that's how I think of employee experience. But I also wanted to say that, like, I spend my time in the design of employee experiences. I think the field of employee experience is rather larger, if you will, right? And so I personally, the charge for me and for people that are in this space is start being specific about what we're talking about. Are you in
Mhm.
the measurement of it? Are you in the design of it? Because
Mhm.
employee experience is like the topic of a leadership. What do you want to talk about? What is it? Like what? And it's become, we do employee experience work. I'm like, no, you don't, because you can't do employee experience work. What do you do in this discipline, if you will, of employee experience? Are you designing experiences? Are you helping organizations learn about how to create them? What exactly are you doing? And so, not to get on the soapbox, but yeah, that's how I define it. And then I get a little icky about, tell me, like, let's get closer to it, because otherwise it feels very vague.
So, thank you for bringing that up. So help us, myself, and any listeners, develop our bullshit detector here for this area. So, what is not employee experience, and in other words, what it's faux employee
So,
experience, or what might you hear that it's like, no, that's not it, that's fake, they're bullshitting.
yeah, when touch points become employee experience. So, for example, and I'm not just to make it clear to the audience or the listeners, I am not throwing anybody underneath the bus. We live and die by touch points, but there are certain touch points that aren't going to transform your experience no matter what.
Can we just
So
define what a touch point is, just for, again, the lay
yeah, so
audience?
a touch point is something that you interact with that actually is an experience in and of itself. So experience in our context has layers and layers, if you will. It's a very nestled concept. So people have an interaction with a touch point that creates their experience. Yet multiple touch points create multiple experiences over time.
And to clarify that just more concretely, a touch point, maybe it's interaction with some software or some type of
Yeah.
like meetings or reviews with other people, or it can
Yeah.
be like
Touch
spaces
points
within
kind of
like an
come in.
office.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
touch points can come in a physical form, in a
Right.
digital form, or the human form, if you
Right.
will. Or now maybe even the machine form, which you can argue is that digital or not, but we won't go there. So
Yeah.
yes, those are the sort of forms, if you will, that touch points present themselves in. And
Mhm.
so our role in designing experiences to curate, if you will, or to refine, if you will, these interactions over time so that people have so the desired experience is what actually happens in this craft, if you will. So I think for faux employee experience, if I hear somebody say, well, we do employee engagement surveys, that's employee experience. To me, that's a no. You haven't even entered it. What you're actually evaluating in engagement is completely different than what you're trying to understand in people's experiences. Now, could you argue that having a good experience might improve somebody's degree of engagement? The answer is absolutely. But they're very different concepts, and they evolve very differently, if you will. So of course our goal is to get people to engage deeper, to be more committed, to be more loyal, to be able to be in an environment that accentuates their performance and their productivity. Yeah, those are all great end goals, but you can't get engagement with engagement. You have to come in with a different intervention, i.e. employee experience in design. So to me, that's one faux, if you will. When people tell me they do journey maps, and that's employee experience, I want to cringe, if you want the honest truth. That's one design tool in thousands of design tools that help us understand what somebody is going through and maybe even lays down the canvas for how we might think about crafting something that works better for them. But it is not employee experience. It's a tool with a lot of value, yet it's still a method
So
and a tool.
journey maps, meaning that's their deliverable, that's like what they're
Yeah,
producing.
that's what they
Oh,
produce. Yeah.
oh yeah, no, that's just
Or if
wrong.
they do an empathy map or they have a design thinking workshop, that's employee experience. Employee experience is the outcome of something. It is not a thing that we work on. So what are we working on, right? So I always think of like human-centered design is the application, is the discipline. Employee experience design is the application of the human-centered design discipline in the space of work. The outcome of any design or lack thereof design is the experience. So I kind of think about it as this progression, so to speak. So when people tell me we're doing employee experience, I say, tell me more. That's the first question I ask. And if they say, well, we have a listening group of people, we're listening. And I'm like, so what are you trying to tell me? Well, we're doing employee experience because we're listening. I'm like, doesn't make sense to me. Listening is, are you saying you're doing research? No, we're listening. Okay, so for what purposes are you listening? So employee listening is a huge function in a lot of organizations. Yet I think the listening functions without clarity on what am I listening to? Why am I listening to something? What does listening even mean and look like? You can't really say it's employee experience because that's coming from voice of employee or learning why people are engaged or not engaged in your company. It doesn't necessarily transcend or equal employee experience. So when I hear a little bit of this, Ezekiel, I always want to know more. Like, tell me why, tell me what you're trying to do. What are you trying to achieve? So I'm less enamored by, oh, we do employee experience. I'm more enamored when I get to the heart of what they're doing and then evaluate whether I think that's going to support greater impact on the people and the business. And then I'll get into more of what does it really mean and that kind of thing. So there have, as in a lot of new things, there have been a lot of professionals, I would say, that have changed their title to employee experience,
Oh, yes.
VP of employee experience and
Mhm.
culture, VP of employee experience and physical events, and VP of employee experience and brand. And I've learned, I think maybe through my old age wisdom or my sarcastic nature now that has come to bear, is that, tell me what you're really doing, is kind of the way that I respond, because many of us have learned that we can shift our title to actually be an identity we hope for, not one that we necessarily embody at the moment. And that's just human nature. So
Yeah.
I've like realized that I'm good with that. Maybe even I do that sometimes, right? But connecting to people and really asking them what they're trying to do and how they're doing it is, to me, a better indication of if I believe they're on a path to making an impact, then I think that's where my heart really lies. Like, call whatever you want, define it however you want. What are you really trying to do? What kind of impact are you trying to make on people in the world of work? And then we can decide whether the application of human-centered design is going to be helpful to you getting your outcome or not. That's taken a long time for me to
Yeah.
be okay with, Ezekiel, as well.
There's some people with innovation in their title that just have no business flying themselves as much. Is that not so much? I don't want to like cast a really harsh judgment on the person, but we come back to self-awareness and listening. And I think when I've encountered leaders who really are moving the needle, I think a common thing that I see is a lot of humility and grace
Hmm.
in how they operate. And I think those are really good things to look for in people who are after the status and looking smart and sexy. That's usually a shallow pool, and there's not a lot of depth there, and
Yeah. How about
not a
this
lot to
title?
show.
HR business partner for I'm a HR business partner employee experience. And I think to myself, what? Like that's the like old Ulrich HR model with the employee experience on it. So what then I say, oh, okay, so you're essentially the delivery part of HR, by the way, who has a huge impact on one's experience from a service
Mhm.
delivery perspective, right? But like, let's get that cleared up there then, because HR business partners usually aren't the delivery arm of HR anyway. And then how you got employee experience involved in that, I'm not sure. Well, so when I see those kind of titles, that's where I kind of get a little weak in my knees, because I'm kind of like, what are we doing? Like, we can't, like, this is meant to be a value add. And if we start to pick all of its value out of it, then we end up with nothing yet
Yeah.
again. And I think that's what I probably get the most frustrated about, is if we pick all the value out of it, then what is its value and where is the impact it will make beyond HR? Because maybe unpopular is, I don't equate employee experience with human resources, period.
Mm.
Done deal, nothing. Because we still need human resources as a function. It has nothing to do with employee experience. Now, we may if you want to be in the EX practice, I would say, and you come from a human resources background, so be it. That's fine. But then you are becoming an EX practitioner. You are not an HR
Mhm.
person. Well, you might be with a flair, so to speak. But for
Mhm.
me, employee experience has nothing to do with any function in a company. It has to do with the organization and the employee, as I described before. And yes, many functions need to get involved, including, and more importantly, the business and the managers and the leadership team, to really truly improve and innovate employee experience. If they are not part of the mix, you're touching about 20% of what a real person deals with in a real company. So you're making very little impact to one's life in a company. I mean, this just beyond, if you're the orchestrator, then maybe you have a bigger role in bringing everyone together and getting it right. I prefer to think of myself as, if you want to do that, then call yourself an orchestrator and let's go orchestrate. But unfortunately, I think HR has kind of almost slipped into being this EX, if you will, champion or owner. And I honestly worry a little bit about the mixed message it sends to the business yet again, who now is saying, well, HR, you're responsible for employee experience. Where is it? I can't see it. I can't feel it. Come on. And we're missing yet a great opportunity to truly transform work experiences if we take that route.
Totally agree. If there's not really strong and clear leadership from the very top, then it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, at least in my journeys, my observation is HR is not a business unit that has a lot of power or a lot of budget. So putting that responsibility of EX on that business unit is very flawed for many reasons pertaining to not having a lot of budget or a lot of power. And I think a leader can make a lot of difference with a handful of decisions.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
I don't completely disagree with you, but I don't
mhm,
completely agree with you. I guess my
mhm,
perspective is that it's all relative. So in my days at Accenture, not to put Accenture on any pedestal whatsoever, because they're good and they're bad, but HR was extremely influential, and it was almost a mixture of a supply and demand function as much as it was compliance and other factors of HR like comp and ben and all those kinds of things. But I think the humility and grace that we had in HR at the time, because I was not only in consulting, then I was in human resources, then working with the chief people officer at the time, is there was a strong connection with the business. There was a level of respect that was equally distributed between HR. So HR had a lot of pull, and not so much in that HR bad pull way. Like it was really more of a partnership that the business and
mhm.
HR had. Yet I know a lot of friends who worked in other companies where HR wasn't respected whatsoever and was thought of as the administrative arm of whatever. So there are different, I think there are different levels of, if you will, HR excellence, so to speak. But I think it starts with the leader of HR and the vision that they set forward and their own willingness to be uncomfortable. Because many of them feel, I think, somewhat threatened by new trends because that means they have a bigger challenge to deal with, more to navigate. So it takes, in my opinion, somebody who is very open and innovative themselves to be leading this, like the world of work in the future. I think if they're the kind of individual who's very concerned about their own sphere and ego and their sphere that's driving them, they will make, I think, they'll be difficult to have a huge followership in their future. So I don't know, like I think the only reason I don't say employee experience equals HR, I feel like HR is a huge contributor, and HR, in my opinion, yet again needs to convince everybody that they should lead it because they can do that by delivering a great experience in the services that they create for people. Yet they don't do that. They're ready to move. They're ready to go somewhere else. It's sort of like is if pay lives in your world, is pay happening in a great experience? Is comp happening? Like fix your own stuff before you go telling everybody else how to fix their stuff. And I think it's a show don't tell world. And I'm ready for HR to show us that they can do great things in their own sphere. And so in many cases in organizations and clients that are, let's just get our own shit organized and give a good experience. And then through that, the business will learn that we know how to do this design thing. We know how to deliver great experiences, and then we can be role models for that. But we can't go telling other people that they're not doing the right, that the experience isn't great when ours isn't great either. But I really try to put HR in the, yes, you are part of the experience, you contribute to it, you could play the role of orchestrator, yet that means you're going to have to cross a lot of silos and burn a lot of bridges at the same time because you can't do both. You do both when you do that, and kind of maybe encourage them to be orchestrators versus the owners or the advocates or whatever the case may be. And I think it just kind of comes down to like HR is not an employee experience, but what role can HR play in employee experience, and how might they be able to advance, if you will, the cause
For sure. And I
without
think
it being.
for people who want to build skills, I think you just flagged the kind of the roadmap to get there, which is clean up your own house and then build a portfolio, and then you can show, hey, I know how to do this. Now let me go help other units in the organization. So yeah, starting in-house is a great way to get some reps and skill build and practice
Yeah,
for sure.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Lisa, I just want to take here an interlude to once again rewind and ask you, what is it that attracted you to this type of work? Like, how is it that you made this shift from the person that you're describing kind of in the early 90s, early on in Accenture, to how is it that you ended up doing this that you're doing today?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think for the time that I was at Accenture, when you're in the consulting space at Accenture or even Anderson Consulting way back when it first started, you get the opportunity of a lot of different varieties of projects that in general are all about trying to make organizations healthy ecosystems in many ways, right? So you touch a little culture, you do a little change management, you do some org design, you have some coaching or executive coaching, you learn the ropes of what it means to be a true HR professional. Yet towards the end of my 19 years, I ended up working with the chief people officer, and our focus was transforming HR into the next generation of what HR would look like at Accenture. Again, realizing now that actually our HR organization was pretty darn good compared to I would say a lot of organizations, and it's a huge, I think, badge to carry forward. But in any case, I was doing that work. I was truly burnt out, Ezekiel, at the end of it, and all I could think to myself was, this isn't working. I've been spending 19 years trying to do this to get to a point where I felt really positive about the impact that I was making. And I remember leaving feeling like I didn't suss it out. Like I'm still feel like I don't have the tools to actually make change positive. And I don't mean in the change management sense, because I never was a huge believer in change management, because I never thought it would work for me. Like I literally would watch people doing these change management plans, and I would think to myself, if I was that employee, I'd be like, I'm not doing that shit. No, thank you very much. I'm not changing tomorrow on your schedule whenever you decided. And maybe I was just being really argumentative or whatever the case you want to call me. I don't care. But at the same point in time, I thought, not going to happen. It's not going to happen. So I didn't really believe in it. So I guess my point to you is when I left there, I kind of went in search of like, what's out there? Like, because I told you again, my head was pretty much deep in Accenture. So leaving knowing that whatever, all the tools that I felt like I had built myself or been part of, and I just never felt a sense of fulfillment. But I still didn't want to leave the space of making work better for people. So I started this discovery of what's going out in the world now. What can maybe I like design because I was doing graphic design at the same time. So when I thought of design, I thought very much about your traditional industrial design, graphic design kind of work. But obviously, I stumbled on human centered design, and it transformed everything I thought of. And then I was like, I found it. I found how I could use design that I love, whether it's visual design or graphic design or just a design mindset, and I could apply it to the world of work. So I can make all of those years that I learned so much about how organizations operate. And I have now this tool set that I feel very connected with, that I can use to make change or make a positive impact. And I was like in love, and I'm still in love with the idea that I could do that. So I think at the end of the day, that was the big time for me, feeling like a failure, frankly, and then finding a whole new way of thinking that I had not opened myself up to, not because I wasn't open, but rather because I was so deep in the mud, so to speak. And yeah, at the time of burnout, I just like I said, I need to take a break. And I literally took a sabbatical that ended up only lasting. I wanted to like take 9 months, and I think I took like maybe 3 months. And when I found this, I was just like, oh, now I need to go do this. And that's what's propelled me, I think, Ezekiel, to kind of do the mix. That's really, I think, yeah, that was the entree to the next chapter in my career, frankly.
Yeah. I have a different journey, but a similar effect when I found design thinking was like putting on an oxygen mask and being like, and then really
I
feeling
agree.
validated because I have some training and then some thoughts about anthropology. And I always had that instinct to find out more about people and what they needed and kind of like how they
Yeah.
figured out their own problems and support that. And then to know that there was like a structure and a vocabulary and an approach and like a bucket of
Yeah.
tools, it was just such a relief. And yeah, it's just feeling like validated, like, oh, I'm not nuts. Okay, this is like actually a thing that you can do and practice
Yeah.
and achieve some impact with. So
Yeah. And
I relate to that.
there was this one moment in the HR transformation where I remember saying, let's go talk to some people, about our services. And there was a real strong lean that says, no, we know better. We know what they need. And I think at that time I think that's going to bite us in the ass at some point in time.
Mhm.
And I kind of think it did. I mean, I think if everyone were to rewind, I'm not saying that I'm the only smart one here by any stretch. I may have said that years ago, but I know that now is not the case. But if we were all to rewind and think, oh, we could have just like, we did a couple of interviews, we did maybe a couple of surveys, but even then we were like, yeah, they don't know what they're talking about, even though we have their feedback. Let's go do this over here. You know what I mean? And of course, there were pressures for time and money and all that kind of stuff. But yet now you
Mhm.
realize that with the same amount of money, or maybe even less money, you can change things by having this design mindset, this beginner's mindset that is priceless. So, yeah, huge turning point for me.
Yeah.
Huge.
So with all of your career experience pulled together and this design thinking, this designerly explorations, what reflections do you have about what have you learned that really resonates and connects with people? On the flip side, what does not? What thoughts do you have around that?
Yeah, I mean, in the space of employee experience design, what resonates with people, I have found is let's talk and let them try it kind of thing. Like I've done 2 workshops today already, and individuals from other countries beyond the US. So English isn't necessarily their strongest language. And I could talk for an hour about why empathy is important, right, in the design process. Or I can talk about it for 2 minutes or 3 minutes, if you will, have them run through an exercise, experience it firsthand, and then come back and have much more substance conversations about its value. So, in one of my biggest takeaways is talk a little, let them experience things, then talk a lot more. So that's a lesson that I've incorporated in a lot of my work because I am so close to it, I think, Ezekiel, as I imagine you are for doing it for so long, that we now think it's old hat or it's
Oh yes, like breathing air is like
easy,
normal. Yeah.
it's normal. But for so many of them, one, that they're starving to learn something new in a
Mhm.
way that works for them, which I sort of leaned into a little bit more. Like if I recall back in the day, how many times I was learning something that was, I don't know, life transforming, and I don't think it happened very often, if I'm brutally honest. And I could have been closed off, like you said, but more than not, it wasn't, it didn't feel like it was gonna help me do my job any better. It felt like it was an agenda for somebody else to get their learning stuff done, if that makes any sense. But
Yeah.
anyhow, so really trying to connect with people and understand like why they want to be part of the session. Is it because they feel pressured to learn something because their boss is going to evaluate them? I just have empathy for them. I think about them as humans. Like if I were back in the day and I was doing this session, why would I be joining and what would I be wanting to learn? So the practical side of me would say, can you just be quiet and let me try this so I can ask you questions? The theoretical side of me would be like, I want to talk about this and get to the reason why this is better than something else. I'd want to be seen and heard. I want to be asked about who I am, what I do for a living, and why this might be important for me. So it's just like it's being able to run through those rounds, Ezekiel, of like of it's more about the connection we're making with each other. And yeah, the content to me is still really important because I find competency, one of my values, I just did some value work the other day, was I find like I have a lot of value in I add a lot of value to competency. So if you show up to
Mhm.
me and you try to fake your way through it, I'm going to have a real strong aversion to that. If you show up and say, I don't have a lot of experience in this, I want to learn, I have a completely different perspective about it. If you show up and have a strong competence, I'm enamored by you. It's just a value that I have deep inside of me. So now I try to use that for realizing that other people may not value the same kind of thing, but equally just doing a little bit more of, why are people here? What might they want to get out of it? How can they be seen and heard in the session? How might I ask them to contribute to how this could be better, as opposed to feeling very much like I have to be the expert and nobody else could have better advice and that kind of thing. So I think it's a little bit of that. That's kind of something I've learned over the years, maybe a little bit late, but I feel good that I'm in that space right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I relate. Like, I think some years back, something that I used to value was being smart, like smart people or the appearance of being smart myself. And now as I age, there's this dichotomy that I feel I'm getting wiser and dumber at the same time. So I don't know, go figure.
Yeah, I know that
Um,
feeling all too well.
but, but it's like going back to the embodiment, there's just so much around human connection. And I've learned over time, the other killer app aside from listening is being a good facilitator, and just kind of it I get into Bruce Lee territory here. It's like being just an empty container, right? It's kind of like
Yeah.
a be like water type of thing, but really being like creating the container for people to come in, and creating some light structure for people come in and have their own unfolding and discovery and process and embodied experience, and hopefully walking away with some memorable lessons, but also some ownership, like, oh, I co-created this, like this part of me, and this, like, I own this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think then you don't need like the whole change management, that kind of the older school approach, because then people have a very different relationship to something they've co-created, that it's in their environment or part of the structure that they exist in. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I absolutely agree with you. I think co-creation is an amazing approach, frankly. And I just hope that we can preserve what co-creation really is all about before we muddle it all up, because we're already doing that very well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think co-creation, in my opinion, is what I call built-in change management. So
Yeah, for sure.
that's my cheesy way of saying it's just built-in change management.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So, well, I've heard you say that organization should be less of a place that people have to go to, and instead be more somewhere where people want to go to. So tell me more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can look at work two ways, and I think it's a very individual point of view. I have to go to work, or it's something I want to go to work because I feel some degree of fulfillment. And even in the degree of fulfillment, there's probably I have to do something in some way, shape, or form, right? Yeah, my whole mission at Explore is to make the world a better place to work. So I intentionally say make the world a better place to work, because I want that to be for everybody, for all over the world, not just in America or US or whatever, and take this very Western kind of approach. But I feel like with all the things we've talked about today, technology, more introspective approaches, innovation at its finest, why is the thing that is meant to be the most progressive work and how we can make an impact on each other, the thing that feels the most archaic? It just doesn't, it's very ironic to me, frankly, that that people still feel like they're a number at work, or they feel like there's no humanness to work, or even if I don't care if you work in a factory or a warehouse, I'm making no judgments about what you do for a living. But even the individual who works for the sanitation company in your local community, that
Mm-hmm.
person's still a human. They still have a purpose. Their purpose might be to go to work to bring home money for their family, but their experience, even in whatever they do, is still really important, because positive experiences change our DNA. They change the level of serotonin and dopamine we have in our body. And that's what actually brings us fulfillment, frankly. You know what I mean? So it's, to me, it's all I can, this is a common story that I hear. When work is horrible on Sunday, after I've done supposedly all my fun, and it's about 4 p.m., I start to feel this disgusting feeling in my stomach. That indicates to me that what I'm doing is not helping me. Yet
Mm.
on Sunday afternoon at 5 o'clock, when I still am enjoying my family, not because I'm blocking out that feeling, that gut feeling, but it's because I don't fear what's coming the next morning. That's when I want to go to work. That's what I do all my work for, because I remember that feeling and I wanted to just end it. It was just sort of like this, I can't do this anymore. Like, how long can you feel this gross feeling in your stomach to realize that somehow you're not aligned to whatever it is you're doing? And for the amount of hours we spend at work, and I have lots of numbers around that. Yeah. You spend more time at work than you spend with anybody you love, frankly, in your life.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think I need to finish the sentence. That's what it's all about. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Um,
Sure. So, what does it take to make work a better place for people? Like, what are some concrete steps either leaders or team can take to creating just a better employee experience, a better work experience in the workplace?
yeah, I mean, it's not there's no one, two, three, unfortunately, as I'm sure there's no school solution whatsoever. But I think I guess one of the practices amongst a lot of them are really to step outside of a step outside of your own assumptions about what makes something good and what makes something not so good, and realize that people come from all walks of life with all kinds of crosses to bear, yet positive things that are going on in their life. And it's a little about seeking to understand, if you will, and then thinking about how you can co-create something that works for as many people as possible. And it's not about having the solution and presenting it, because that is a
Yeah.
huge assumption in and of itself, right? But for me, if you want to go on this path, there's many journeys you can take and many roads that you can turn in. But you have to have this sort of, if you want to do this, you have to have a stronger sense of your purpose and your commitment to whatever that is, which is, for me, it's how do I make it better little by little? I used to wake up in the morning thinking I was going to change the world of work, like in a day, by the way. So now I'm actually much more, I guess, conservative in the fact that I think, okay, if I could just change it little bit by little bit, then, and the thing that allows me to do that is just really, as corny as it may sound, is the empathy thing, is being able to immerse myself in how other people feel, why they might feel that way. What are all the other things in their own mindset that are stopping them or preventing them? And I think at the end of the day, I think the solution for a lot of organizations is just standardize the shit out of everything, and we can make a great employee experience if we just have it be the same. Yeah, that's the opposite of what this is all
No.
about, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things I think I'm really good at, frankly, is to be able to see all the differences in the patterns, but then to rise above the solution that provides the most for everybody, yet allows for customization. And I think
Mhm.
a lot of organizations struggle with that concept. I still hear them saying, well, we want to make it the same for everybody. And I'm like, are you trying to say you want to make it good for everybody or the same for everybody? Because those are two different definitions, right? So, yeah. So I think I got lost in my answer, frankly, Ezekiel. But I think for me, it's just you got to have a mindset that is going to allow you to create the better place to work. So that means you don't start
Yeah.
with knowing the solution, whether it's the hierarchical organization design or the roles or the operating model or the onboarding experience. You start with, we can come up with anything that allows us to have a stronger positive emotion. A negative emotion isn't always bad, but like, I think everybody wants to like only draw in a container, where I think it allows for us to say what doesn't work anymore, even if it works for
Yeah.
another company. Like, I'm not a huge, if some of my clients say, well, I want to go ask them how they did it. I'm like, why do you care how they did it? They did it for them. This is you doing it for you. No more best practice, no more replication.
Amen.
No more of that. We're trying to like find a new path.
Yeah.
Now you can get ideas, you can learn about other people's innovation, but not as a means of copy and paste, not as a means as benchmarking. Benchmarking is big. I'm not a benchmarking fan. I learned that a long time ago. But
Mhm.
rather as maybe inspiration for what I don't want to do, or inspiration for what I could possibly do as an angle, right? But
Mhm.
it's not the same as it used to be, where we'd be like, oh, tell me what you did. Let me write down all the steps and I'll follow it. It didn't really work then. And now it certainly doesn't work because our contexts are so radically different. Unless you, of course, have the same mission, the same P&L statement, the same leaders, there's no point in copy and pasting any longer. So yeah, when my clients say, can you tell me what you're doing there? And I would say, I can share with you the design activities, but whatever we're designing has nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
So yeah, I hope I answered your question now that
Yeah.
I have
Well, let
gone.
me see if I can sum it up for the listener,
Okay.
because I think I heard you touch on doing really deep listening, and that's just not quantitative data, folks. It's going
No
to spend
survey
time with people and
in their
having
environment.
60 to 90-minute conversations, deep conversations, and being very honest. And I think then we kind of draw the learnings after we speak with enough people, and then get people together, particularly the people who are being served
Mhm.
by the intended solution, and get them involved in this very collaborative co-creation of, okay, let's look at what we learned, like where can we do some changes, and let's at least draw up some concepts and do some validation, like, hey, does this really work for as many people as possible, and is this
Mhm.
something that can be customized, which is something I heard you say, some light
Mhm.
customization, right? So it's
Yeah.
not one size does not fit all, so we want to
Right.
customize a little bit when appropriate. And the other thing I also heard you say, you were emphasizing, is that it all starts by changing your mindset first. Like, you really have to change your mind. And if you don't do that, the rest of the stuff doesn't really gel. It doesn't come together.
Yeah. I mean, when I
Yeah.
do some coaching with new employee experience leaders, I will only begin with mindset. They want to learn design
Yeah.
methods. I'm like, nope,
No.
nope, nope.
No.
Let's think about where we're coming from and where we're going to, and how that really shows up in your work. Because if you pass up that mindset, you will make no impact on the people. They'll be
Yeah.
lost in it. It's just so
Yeah.
different than what we have grown accustomed to do. For example, in human centered design or design thinking, you want to spend, as Albert Einstein says, 80-90% in figuring out what the hell the problem really is, and then 10% in
Yeah.
ideas, because ideas can be cheap, right? So I think so many of us have learned we have to come up with a solution. We have to come up with a solution really fast, and we got to get it screwed in even faster. So we don't take the time to truly understand. And then we wonder why nobody likes what we implemented or uses it. And I know that's becoming old hat now, because I think more and more people are realizing that I don't want to do this project yet again because it doesn't work. And I'm the one who's stuck in that cog going round and round. So I think more and people are waking up to, well, hold on a second. And we're not fixing the right problem. I'm going to be back here in 6 months' time. You're going to be asking me to do the same thing over again. I don't want to do the
That's
same
right.
thing over again, right? So I think more and more people are opening themselves up to that. But equally, I think there's still, how do you balance the senior leadership push for fast results and that kind of thing? And I think, frankly, that's an education aspect and a little bit of drink your own wine, drink your own Kool-Aid, whatever kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing you want
Yeah.
to use. So I'm huge on the mindset shift before
Yeah.
the intervention itself.
Yeah. And I think it ties into something I was bringing up earlier, that one particular leadership book, the Mastering Leadership, and the inner game. Because
Mm,
people, at the end of the day, we have, I think we really undervalue or underestimate our nervous system here in the West, at least,
mm,
where people, we can pick up if somebody cares about us or not. We can pick up on a lot of emotional, on people's intentions, right, who are
mm,
towards us, signaling, body language, etc. And I think that mindset, it does leak out of us, right? We do signal to other people consciously and subconsciously whether we care and whether there's some things, some intentions going on inside of
Yeah.
us or not. And I mean, talk about change management when I think leadership rolls out some program, but it's not really authentic, and people just pick up on that right away, and it just makes people extra cynical, and that just creates like so much more toxicity than even if somebody's just right out a jerk at you versus
Yeah.
I'm going to give you this nice thing on top, but I'm going to be a jerk to you anyway, like behind your back.
Yeah.
And then you're just creating a really bad situation. So I agree. The mindset piece is so huge, but it's one of the things that clients usually want to leapfrog over. And we're like, no, no, this is the thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is the
Yeah.
thing.
It's so
This is what you're
you,
paying for right here. It's
yeah.
changing the
Yeah.
mindset. They don't get
Yeah.
it sometimes.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. One of the things that just kind of occurred to me is that wouldn't work be a whole different kind of place if as part of like the sort of the mantra is that people learn more about themselves in work as opposed to feeling this commitment to learn everything about the organization. So what if work were this opportunity where I'm human, and so as I go through my experiences, my past is going to come to bear. But instead of it being this, you got a B or a C or a D today, it's a more introspective, what might this be telling you about your past and your future, as opposed to it being like, okay, now you're a, what is it now? A hypo, you're a hypo, you're a high performer. Everybody else is shit. You're a hype. I mean, the labels that we even use, the performance management system, it doesn't really support people developing and growing into better people. So I don't know, there's quite a lot I think we could redesign for better, if you will. And it's not rocket science either.
It's not. Well, I think this brings us to the name of this project, which is making business art. What comes up for you when you hear that phrase? What meaning do you make out of that?
Making business art would mean to me that we want to make business, like when I think of art, I think of creative act, frankly. And there's a lot of creative act means essentially, in my mind, that the human is the creator of whatever that is. So for me, that just means making business a little bit more human, a little bit more
Mm.
something that people curate, if you will. They're the curators as opposed to feeling like somebody's doing it to them. It almost feels like I could take a little bit more of a stronger hold, if you will, and create what works for me. Maybe I've misunderstood that, but
Yeah.
that's how I would
Yes.
interpret it.
Your interpret. I think you were touching on this even in what you were sharing before I asked you the question, which is I was kind of interpreting it to mean how can we make shifts in the system so people are expressing and creating something. It's just not so much beholding to a label, to a very constricted, almost meaningless label. But so instead of high performers, like, well, has this person created something, created some value? Like, what
Mhm.
is coming out of them, right? In terms of like idea. And even it's not even idea. Sometimes it's just being the person that inspires other people, like kind of the catalyst of a team that is just kind of like the person that animates the band, right? Even that alone, it's like adds so much value without necessarily creating a widget, but it's
Yeah.
somebody who's
Well,
really effective at animating others. It's just
yeah.
amazing.
Well, what if we were to actually return back to the whole discussion around work kind of being this community? So instead of it
Mm-hmm.
being like, oh, you're the business analyst and you're the designer and you're the developer, what if it was like, what role do you play in the community? Are
Right.
you the catalyst? Are you who are you in the community? And obviously you have the technical skills that you use within that role, which end up being kind of your professional expertise, so to speak. But even just thought process of like, yeah, why don't organizations become more like communities? That's then you have to ask yourself, then how do we get out of this hierarchical structure with these job structures that make people not human, frankly. There's a lot of assumptions in job descriptions, as we all now know. Like how many assumptions have, I mean, they're baked with assumptions and no
Yep.
reality, by the way, no connection. Because most people will tell you that the last time they looked at their job description was when they applied for the role, but nothing actually applies anymore. So, I mean, I'm making an old joke, but sometimes I think it still exists today in a lot of places. But it could be an interesting exploration, if you will, to think a little bit about how that would work.
Yeah. Well, I noticed in your LinkedIn that you went back to school
I
and
did.
got a design and got a degree in graphic design. And I know that you're into typography. So I'm curious if there are any lessons that you have learned from your foray into graphic design and typography that has influenced your EX work in some way.
Oh, that's a great question. And the answer would be yes. So, as we all know, well, let me just start with I am a recovering perfectionist. So that makes throwing your designs out there in a scary world even scarier for somebody who looks at other designers and thinks, oh my God, I'm never going to be able to create something so beautiful as that. So, what it has taught me, at least in my graphic design work, and more probably in my typography and lettering, is sketching is the most amazing thing for my own mental health. So sketching
Mm.
makes me connect with my work more. It makes me explore all the possibilities that exist with even just a letter. If you think just about like an L, the form of an L, how could it be designed so differently for different purposes? So that's solutioning in many ways, right? So what it's helped me understand is sketching is good. So shitty first drafts are amazing, and getting comfortable with all of that imperfection in the design process. I knew it before. I know it now more closely to my heart because yeah, when you see somebody who's been in the design world for years and it's very natural to them. I'm building on my intuitive set that says, no, that actually looks good. It's your style. Like be comfortable with your style and be comfortable that it's not perfect yet, but after many refinements, it will be there. But it is scary to show somebody what you've designed and ask them for their feedback because, quite frankly, in graphic design, it's also very much about style. And style is different than experience, I think, in many ways, because either somebody likes a color or they don't like a color. It affects their experience or it doesn't affect their experience. So I think that's the lesson I learned. It's okay. I can
Mm.
trust myself with a sketch. It starts the conversation, and it through learning about whether the sketch will actually work in the solution, I can iterate and make a better solution. So that was a hard lesson, and I think that's something that I've become a little bit more comfortable with,
Yeah.
honestly.
Yeah. Shitty first drafts are wonderful. I was just introducing this concept to a lead, a business lead that's come up for me. And she seemed like a little shocked, but then she was comfortable. And I'm like, hey, it's just like, it's how good things
Yeah.
get done. But one of the most beautiful things about shitty first drafts, if we're receptive to it, is that it's a great avenue and way to learn and exercise humility and grace.
Yeah.
Because man, you think you have this great thing and then people just shit on it. And you're like, wow, okay, I'm not that
Yeah.
smart. Let me go back and make this better. And it does get better X iterations later, hopefully, but it's so humbling. And I think it's just
It
so good
is.
for helping us be grounded.
Yeah, it also showed me the value of visualization. So what I envision, like if
Yes.
somebody's asking
Yeah.
me to help them create a letter or a brand, what they think is minimalistic, what I think is minimalistic or modern is potentially very different. So until I draw it and show it to them, maybe we're not on the same page. We get more and more on the same page, which ultimately is where you want people to land, which is to be on the same page and deliver value to each other.
Yeah.
So I think I keep that in mind, which is my whole attention in graphic design, as equally now as it is in experience design, is to deliver something that is in service of the people that I'm working with
Yeah.
and whom we're working for, if that makes any sense. So it's definitely a with and a for, as opposed to before it used to be more of a for and less of a with. And the service thing was a little confused because it was like, wait, what's my takeaway in all of this? And I think a lot of it now is the fulfillment I feel in serving other people and kind of helping them get what they need from something.
Yeah.
So I think that's a wisdom thing, Ezekiel. I think maybe we all have that as we grow old. So I'm not so special, if that means.
Yeah. Well, making business hard for me is partially about making our work and life more meaningful and enchanting. So
Yeah.
in that spirit, do you have any other thoughts about how might we make our work and lives more meaningful and enchanting through your toolkit?
No, I guess just show up authentically and really kind of, there are a lot of people who want to be on the party line of an organization, and just know that we suss it out really fast. Like, we know that you're doing the party line. It doesn't add value to changing the way of work, because that's just keeping the patriarchy, if you will, in line. It's not really asking whether that works for people. So
Yeah.
I think that would be the last thing, which is just show up authentically. If it doesn't work, say it doesn't work. I hear these people say, well, I don't want to be negative. Well, the reality of it is, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. I mean, let's not think about whether we're being negative or whether we're being positive. If it works for you, you probably would say it works. If it doesn't work for you, we just need to know it doesn't work, because there's more solutions out there. The possibilities are endless.
Yeah. It's kind of move on, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Lisa. So we're at the end of our conversation. I have a quick lightning round with some
Okay.
questions. They're a little silly. Feel free to pass, but I do encourage you to play. All right, Lisa. So here we go. First question. Can you describe your closet and what state it's in?
I would say my closet is in what I would define as 80% organization, 20% disorganization. So nice and neat,
Got it.
with some
Uh-huh.
fringes around it that make it such that I feel comfortable.
Okay. A little chaos in there just
A little chaos. Yeah.
for comfort. Okay. What is the last piece of media that you loved? And that can be a book or a movie, podcast, etc.
Yeah. So I am reading at the moment The Creative Act. I can show you the book, but I'm
Oh,
reading that.
I listened to it. I love that book. Tell
Yeah.
me about it. What's a highlight for you so far?
Well, I'm not very far into it, but I love the connection with the spirituality and the act of creation, which is kind of what I picked up. And I just embrace that, like, the creative act makes me feel joy. And then,
Yeah.
so I'm trying to explore what that's all about, because I think it can be executed in so many different ways. But I love its connection to spirituality.
Yeah. It's also like really heavily like intuitive and introspective. And I think like just really attuned to somebody's interior, to like our inner life.
Yeah.
And I've seen book reviews, like some people it's just not for them. They just don't get it. Like that whole book, I was like, it was like being at church. I was like, oh my God, this is like the best thing.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that you say that.
Yeah.
I've read like about 4 or 5 books in my life that kind of are
Mhm.
on this thing. And I will tell you, I will read one sentence and I will put it away, and then I'll go back and read it again. And every time I read it, I see a new like I see either the same message heightened in a different way,
Mhm.
or I find something new about it. So I've only gotten so far, because I'm like, I feel like I have to read it before I'm ready to go on. So
Yeah.
it might take me a long time, like it has done with other meaningful books. But so far, yeah, like you said, like I was attached to it. And from, actually, if I'm honest with you, just looking at the aesthetics of the book, I was just like, I need to read this book
Nice.
by its design. So
Yeah, I'll just say this and then we'll move on. Like, I think I want to get the paper copy, even though I'm very cramped in space here. I got the audio, but it's a
mm,
book where sometimes I used to do this before. I don't do this anymore, but sometimes I would just take a book and just open it, like kind of have a question and just open it and
yeah,
see what's there.
see
And
what the answer.
yeah, and sometimes I would interpret something out of that. And I think that is a book that really lends itself to that. Like, oh my God, I'm stuck. What
What
do I do
lesson
to
do I
grow
need
right
to learn
now?
today? And then open it up.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think I'm gonna get me a
Yeah,
paper copy. That'll be awesome.
you should. I actually got the hard copy because I find it to be really pretty, as basic as it is. By the way, till you see, you'll be like, "What do you mean it's pretty?" It's just,
Yeah.
and I'm like, "Yep,
Well, early on, Rick Rubin, who's the author of the book and
yeah,
record producer, he would take credit on albums. Instead of saying produced by Rick Rubin, he would say reduced by Rick
okay.
Rubin, which is
Yeah,
just awesome.
yeah."
Okay. Next question is, what is something that inspires you?
What is something that inspires me? Well, I mean, design of any kind is inspiring to me. But there's something more about a pencil in a hand and the creation, whether it's even a tool, an art tool or whatever. To me, it just gives you so much. It's the same thing as the book. It helps me understand somebody so much more and what's going on in their head and how they connect what's the meaning that they find in something, what's something that they can externally visualize. And I think there's so much beauty in that. Like, it's so funny when I do lettering, I'm having a field day because I'm using a pencil and I can show you volumes of paper that I've used. But when somebody says to me, okay, now you have to go vectorize it, yes, I do. But I actually love the pencil and the paper
Yeah.
because I feel it allows you to be completely open. Where when you get on the vector and you have to vectorize it, it feels very mechanical again. So the art for me is lost. And
Mhm.
I need to get over that because nobody will ever see my lettering until I get it vectorized.
Mm.
Although I can show you shots of all my sketching,
Right.
but
Yeah.
you're still in sketch mode, right? So yeah, I think there's beauty in seeing a human with an instrument trying to express
Mm.
what's happening internally in a very external way.
Yeah. I mean, just a quick commentary here about the pen to paper, and I think there's like research now into this that it does activate our brain in a different way. Like
Mhm.
going back to like its technology, like numbing our nervous system. And I noticed like lately I've been going back to paper
Mm,
about some digital technology just kind of helps my brain in some ways
yeah.
that are meaningful to me. But I've been going back to paper and just putting pencil to paper and writing and sketching things. It just opens other
Yeah.
modes of creativity that it's really valuable thing to do. So that's awesome that you kind of connect with that in that way. Alrighty. So next question is, what is a song or band you must play during a road trip?
Wow, that's a good question. A song or band I must play on a road trip. So this is really cheesy, but one of the bands that I find really cool is the Counting Crows, and I play it because of the memories that I created when I originally had
Of
it.
course.
So yeah, I think a lot of the music is either because of the lyrics that really resonate with me, or because it was part of a past memory that I want to hold on to. So
Yeah.
that's probably, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And the last question is, what do you want to see more of in the world?
Mm. Peace. Is that fair?
Sure.
Peace in all ways. What is happening in a lot of communities very upsetting, but I also want peace in
Mm.
organizations. I feel like
Mm.
organizations are ecosystems of war. And I know that sounds really horrible to say, but if you study organizational behavior and see the politicking that happened. That's just to me, I read something recently which is much more internally focused, but it's like, are you at war with yourself all the time? Are you at peace with yourself all the time? And the
Mm.
answer to that question defines so much about your ability to do so much more in this world than it is
Yeah.
anything else. So
We're,
if
we're,
organizations really
yeah.
want to achieve their altruistic purpose, so to speak, they might look at how many wars they're creating inside their own home. And I know
Mm.
that's a difficult analogy to use, but I think it's emotional war. It's emotional war, psychological war, whatever war you kind of want to fight. I think they're existing in a lot of places,
Mm.
and that's the opposite of what we're trying to really create. At least when I think about creating a world that people want to work in or a better place to work, it's about eliminating all of those kinds of
Yeah.
things.
See, we're right back to mindset and inner game because that's where all that stuff begins, right?
All the starts begins. Yep,
For
absolutely.
sure. Well, Lisa, in closing, I just want to open up space here to give you a chance to just share with listeners what do you have going on, why people should look you up, like what are the keywords when somebody's having
Yeah.
some problem, why should they think of you, and where can people find you?
Alrighty, so let's see, what am I working on? Explore is going through a reflection on the services it can offer to EX practitioners, whether you're aspiring to be an EX practitioner or you're in the middle of your journey. So we're looking at a new design offering, which is much more about being guided in design. So not that I do it for you, but I do it with you and I guide you through it so that you learn how to do it, if you will. Also offering learning labs, so you just get in the nest and be comfortable with experimentation that generally happens in labs to learn human-centered design and a new employee experience design approach. And then finally, I do coaching now with EX leaders, just people who have entered into their role, who need a thought partner or need somebody to bounce some ideas about. Because what I found is some of these leaders feel very isolated in their organizations. There's only a couple of them and they don't have a place to refuge to or somebody to share. So it's a rebrand, not a rebranding necessarily, but a refresh of the offerings. You can look up employee experience. You can look up employee experience design. You can look at, I usually talk about my work at humans in the world of work is my focus. And you can explore at www.explore, XPLORDI, which stands for design and innovation.com. So that's where you can find me, or look me up on LinkedIn. I'm always there as well.
It's a great place. In the information superhighway, remember? Back in the days of the World Wide Web, somebody just said that to me the other day, and I'm like, oh my God, I haven't heard that in like 20-something years. That was hilarious. But Lisa, thank you so much for spending your valuable time with me and for sharing all your different experiences and insights. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was my pleasure, Ezekiel, and knowing you and working with you has been a pleasure equally. So I think we are somehow connected from a long time ago, and we've re-entered that path now. So thanks for having me. It was a great discussion. I really appreciated the questions. So.
Thank you. Well, I'll see you soon.
Okay.